Hey guys, Jake here, and today marks the 1-year anniversary of Gran Turismo 7's release. I want to cover and explain why I think Gran Turismo 7 felt like a joke to longtime Gran Turismo fans. Now, I could talk about the entire first 4 to 6 games and how Gran Turismo 7 was supposed to be like all of those, but let's be honest here, Gran Turismo 7, in the way it was advertised, in the way they were teasing fans, it was really trying to hit the Gran Turismo 4 crowd. And Gran Turismo 4 is my favorite Gran Turismo game and favorite racing game of all time, so I feel like it's only suitable for me to talk about it here. And the first thing I want to say is actually a disclaimer. I am not nostalgic for Gran Turismo 4. I never grew up with a PlayStation. I grew up with Nintendo and Xbox consoles. My first PlayStation was actually a PS4 that I got in April of 2018. And while to this day, I'm still not a fan of the hardware, I was impressed with Gran Turismo Sport and wanted to go back to the older games in the series. Eventually in 2020, I got around to starting Gran Turismo 4 properly. Over time, even though I'm not nostalgic for the game, it has become my favorite racing game of all time. Why is that exactly? Before I played Gran Turismo 4, I thought that the original Grid had the best career mode of any racing game I'd ever played. Gran Turismo 4 is a completely different beast to every other racing game that exists when it comes to its campaign. Now, if I describe Gran Turismo 4's campaign in a few words, those might be words that actually sicken people nowadays. Being long, open-ended, and disconnected. But these things are what make Gran Turismo 4's career special. You start out with nothing, the game gives you no tutorial, you have to find out what to do on your own. Do you go and take the license test, or do you go and try to find a used car? If you take the license test and get good enough, you can get yourself a Nismo 270R. If you go to the used car dealership, you could find yourself in a Daihatsu midget and have to restart the game. This is just the beginning, but it describes the entire ethos of GT4. The game is completely open-ended in a very, very inviting way. The difference between Gran Turismo 4's open-endedness and Forza Horizon's open-endedness is that Forza Horizon's open-endedness feels completely lazy, and it feels like the developers came up with nothing good to do, and you just kind of have to decide for yourself what to do. In GT4, it feels like everything is made and thought through carefully, but that you can pick what to do at your own pace. For example, you could just be doing the main campaign, maybe get stuck on a place or you're not in the mood to play that part of the game anymore, and go play a driving mission, improve your times in the license tests, or browse a used car dealership and buy a car that gets you into a one-make race that you weren't able to get into before with only a specific car, a specific set of cars. And there are so many of them. On paper, it might look like, oh my gosh, to complete this game, there's so much to do. But when you're playing GT4, it's really not like that. This is a single-player game that enjoyably takes years on end to complete. For me personally, the games that I get the most playtime out of are actually multiplayer games that last a long time. A single-player game doesn't usually capture my time for a long amount of time. You play it for maybe 20, 30, maybe 40 hours, you have a memorable experience, and then you don't really play it again. But Gran Turismo 4 is a single-player offline game that lasts a long-ass time. And that's something that makes it incredibly unique, not just among racing games, but among single-player games in general. And even in a sea of a ton of different events, you're constantly rewarding Gran Turismo 4. And the reason you're able to be constantly rewarded is because of the massive car list. Because this is a game that actually uses its massive car list in what I would say the right way. In Forza, you have most of the cars you want within a pretty small amount of time, then your garage is bloated with cars that don't even feel like yours, and you just end up scrolling through a ton of cars that you don't even want. This is made worse by the fact that you can't really even see your own car very well. The preview image isn't even that big. They have to make them smaller because they know you just have too many cars. In Gran Turismo 4, you actually earn these cars slowly and carefully, and they're able to spread them out because it's such a long and varied career mode. So between all the varied modes like driving missions, the main campaign, one-make races, license tests, special events, and more, Gran Turismo 4 is an incredibly rewarding and long-lasting single-player campaign that has entertained so many players, and even though I only started playing it in 2020, it's become my favorite racing game of all time. And of course, there's plenty of other things to like about Gran Turismo 4. The game has an excellent original soundtrack and a really interesting, kind of old aesthetic, but also kind of new at the same time. Something is extremely charming about it, and I don't think there's a racing game more charming than this one. The arcade mode is done perfectly. You can race a ton of different cars in the arcade mode. There's no separate progression. It's just kind of simple, pick a car, pick a track, and go. Even the split screen is done right with actually having it vertically instead of horizontally, in my opinion. And the game features so many interesting cars you will never find in other games. But that career mode and the replayability of the game is a big part of why people remember Gran Turismo 4 so much and so fondly. And this is where I want to start about Gran Turismo 7, because that's where Gran Turismo 7 kicked off its marketing. When GT7 was first revealed in June of 2020, the game's menu looked like this. Does it look familiar to you at all? They knew what players wanted. They knew we wanted a new Gran Turismo 4-like game, not something that's just like a direct copy of it, but something that is extremely replayable, varied, fun, but just with new graphics, cars, features, and modes. The next big batch of information we got about the game was in September of 2021 at the PlayStation Showcase. And they really tried to pull people's nostalgia strings once again with this one, because this fantastic trailer was full of references to nearly every old Gran Turismo intro movie. And of course, they revealed the Castrol Tom Supra to be in the game, which is one of the franchise's most beloved cars. And then later on, they showed the Pennzoil Skyline in that same trailer, another very beloved car. So this trailer was clearly made for Gran Turismo fans. And it really got us excited because it communicated that they knew what we wanted. The next batch of information was the State of Play, which had a bunch of exciting and cool new stuff. And just about a month after the State of Play, the game launched, and the game's launch was full of controversy, with a bunch of economy and microtransaction problems, as well as the game's online requirements showing its ugly side, with the game being unplayable for several days. And these problems, of course, were launch problems. Of course, some of these things are still in the game and they're not great, but they aren't why Gran Turismo 7 felt like a joke. These were simply almost mere distractions from the game Gran Turismo 7 actually was. So let me rewind it back once again. Gran Turismo 4 had a massively long, varied, and fun campaign mode with a bunch of different event types, a bunch of different objectives that was completely open-ended, all on your way to achieving 100% completion. What does Gran Turismo 7 have for comparison? A game being marketed as a replacement or a sequel almost to Gran Turismo 4. Menu books, which are these different sort of event collections that give you 2 or 3 races that you are forced to use a specific kind of car in. There are overall 3 cars in the menu book. Once you finish one race, you get gifted the car in your garage, meaning at the end of the day, you have a lot of cars in your garage that you don't actually want. Sound familiar? Never mind the opposite to Gran Turismo 4's open-ended format. These events have nearly no variety in them, and you can complete this campaign fast. And once you're done with it, you're left wondering, okay, when does the real campaign start? When does, the actual Gran Turismo mode start? It never does. It's been a year, and I haven't even finished the menu books in Gran Turismo 7 because they are just so unrewarding, uncaptivating, and unfun. This wouldn't even be a good campaign mode outside of Gran Turismo. I'm not mad because it's a different kind of campaign mode in a Gran Turismo game, because GT PSP and GT Sport have, changed up a bit, and those were fine for what they were. But for this being marketed as a Gran Turismo 4 sequel or spiritual successor or whatever, and the campaign being a complete joke, the biggest, most important part of the game essentially missing, is a disgrace to Gran Turismo 4. It's a disgrace to the Gran Turismo series, and I think it's a disgrace to Polyphony Digital, because it means this game isn't really replayable unless you make liveries or you play sport mode. For the people who enjoyed the Gran Turismo campaigns, this game has nothing for you. And of course there's other great elements, like there's plenty of nice new cars, there's plenty of great new customization parts. I think the customization is actually done really well, but all of that is pointless when there's nothing to do with these new elements. There are no one-make races. There are driving missions, but they're outside of the main campaign. There's no section for special off-road rally races. There's just a couple of them within the campaign. And all the different interesting reward cards you get throughout the campaign in Gran Turismo 4 are almost gone in GT7. Yes, there are plenty of cars that you get for free, but there's nothing that's a surprise or unexpected reward, and all the race cars you'd be getting before are locked behind the legendary dealership. It's hilarious how in my Why Forza Horizon 5 is Dead in Quotations video, I talked about GT Sport, and I praised it for how good it was with its live service content and updates, just, adding cars and then buying them, in the in-game dealer for regular in-game cash, meaning that you could come back to the game whenever you want and just progress however you'd want to get money to buy the car. It's just a much more enjoyable time than how Forza Horizon does their content updates. And originally I said in that recording that I figured Gran Turismo 7 was going to be the exact same, but in fact, they did the same freaking thing as Forza Horizon. They added FOMO, fear of missing out. And this is another aspect that kills the replayability of Gran Turismo 7 to me. Yes, I want that McLaren F1 GTR. Yes, I want the CLK GTR race car. But I'm not going to play a game that is mind-numbingly boring with no replayability and grind on it for hours and need to make sure I need to be on for the specific time that it's actually in the legendary dealership, which is completely random with no pattern whatsoever. When before, you could just log on to the game, and if you had enough credits, you could just, buy it. Now, I think giving the race cars and the classic cars their own dealership that fits the vibe of those cars is a pretty good idea, but it's done so in a way where it's made the game feel incredibly prestigious and cocky. And this aspect of the game is one of the reasons why I just don't have any hope for the game going forward. They've had no acknowledgement that the career mode has been extremely disappointing to longtime players. They haven't fixed the always online requirement, and the content updates they have for a long time been really lackluster compared to Gran Turismo Sport. For nearly the whole first year of release, we got updates that were only 3 cars per month, when GT Sport had often 5 to 8 cars per month. And that game wasn't widely acknowledged as a huge disappointment. It was very different, sure, but it did what it was going for pretty dang well. Sport was never marketed as a replacement to GT4, but it does the regular single-player campaign better than the game that's marketed to be its sequel. And that leads to another problem, which in some ways GT7 is a giant downgrade from Sport, and in other ways it feels the exact same. I think, for example, the physics feel a lot better in Gran Turismo 7, they feel a lot more realistic and less like you're glued to the road, but the HUD is the exact same. And if we're talking exact same, there is something that I like to criticize, especially when it comes to Need for Speed community, is that if you just keep reusing old things, we're never going to get anything new. Gran Turismo 7 does this with its music. Now, before launch of Gran Turismo 7, we got previews of a bunch of the new tracks in the game, and the first initial trailer actually had my favorite song in the game, which didn't actually make it to the final cut, sadly. But the State of Play had a bunch of great songs, and those appeared in the game, and those are all new songs. But these new songs feel like they only make up a third or half of the soundtrack. The majority of the menu music is from Gran Turismo 5. And yes, Gran Turismo 5's menu music is great, so technically it should be fine to reason. No. Gran Turismo 7 has a pretty different vibe than Gran Turismo 5, and each Gran Turismo game has its own unique music. Imagine if Gran Turismo 3's music was so good that they just reused it in 4 and never made the remixes or the new songs, so we never actually got to hear GT4's soundtrack. When you just reuse stuff, it means that your game isn't going to have specific memorable things about it. And GT7 certainly doesn't. Whether it comes to the campaign mode, the missing features, the FOMO, the music. Gran Turismo 7 felt like a joke. And that is my explanation as to why.